This video is an introduction to SAP Lab 3, Accounting and Bookkeeping. This video is specific to the Supplemental ERP Sim SAP Labs and Textbook, 2nd edition. If you're not using this, there's really not a whole lot of purpose in you watching this video. So feel free to watch, but you really need to be using this textbook. This is the introduction to Lab 3, which presumes you've completed Labs 1 and 2 successfully. If you have not, don't watch this video. Complete those labs and then come back and watch this. Really want to go over what to expect in Lab 3 and some advice for some successful completion of this lab. So within Lab 3, it's accounting and bookkeeping. It's not easy. It's not hard, but it's not easy. If you remember your accounting classes, there's a lot of attention to detail required in accounting. One little thing gets thrown off and everything from there on is off. So think through accounting, realize you're doing really some bookkeeping, some accounting within this. But one little thing is off, a debit and credit. If you misread the instructions, everything kind of gets thrown off. So go into this thinking about accounting, slow down, take your time, read the instructions. So don't rush through this. This is not hyperbole. This isn't an unnecessary warning of the labs. This is certainly the most complicated. The instructions are within the text. It tells you how to get through every bit of this, so don't skip any of the text. By the time you get to Lab 3, it also presumes you've learned something about SAP by now. So in Lab 1, it presumes you've never ever used SAP before and walks you through all the steps to do certain things. Once you get into Lab 3, it starts to assume you know how to do things like, as an example, search for a vendor. So in Lab 3, it says, search for the vendor, and doesn't tell you how. Well, that's in Lab 1. So if you need to find that, you can go back to Lab 1 to figure it out. It assumes you have learned by now. So Lab 3 is not the kind that you can just jump into. You really have to work from Lab 1 to Lab 2 to Lab 3. So remember that Lab 3 is about accounting, so it follows the rules of accounting. So if you think accounting as you jump into it, so it's the cash-to-cash business cycle, again, a buzzword. So Labs 1 and 2, we did not do anything with cash. So you might say, well, we bought things or we sold things, but nothing actually happened on the cash side. The accounting part of it was not taken care of. So Lab 1 was production, ordering the raw materials and actually producing. Lab 2 picked up where that ended and sold and shipped everything. So ordering the raw materials was a cash transaction. Creating the sales order is a cash transaction. So all of these, there's cash out, cash in. This is, again, where the cash-to-cash business cycle comes from, where the name comes from. Lab 3 is where we actually do the cash. So throughout the lab, if you're working within a group, remember that you can be locked out of transactions. So the F-whatever transactions, you have to go into them one at a time. You can't all go in at once. So the first person in has access to everything. Remember, only complete your transaction using your data. If you go into these transactions and you have access to everyone's data, the default is everything is selected. You need to unselect, deselect your data. So remember that. If you are working as a group, everybody can kind of watch and make sure that you're only working with yours. But make sure you're only completing your transaction and your data. Make sure you read the instructions. If you don't click save or post, nothing happens within these transactions. And if it doesn't go through, it might be a few pages in the lab before you start getting results that you're not expecting. So take your time, make sure you click all the buttons that you're instructed to click. If you have a group, I highly recommend working as a team, completing one transaction at a time, and wait for everyone else. This is, again, not a rush to get through. Take your time. You're working as a team. This is presumably the team you'll have all semester once you get into the simulation. So get to know each other's learning styles, get to know each other, slow down. Remember that if one person makes a mistake along the way, it could throw off the entire lab for everyone. So it is important to slow down and take your time. So seriously slow down. Remember how much fun you've had already in Labs 1 and 2. Well, the party stops in Lab 3. It's tedious, meticulous, there's a lot of attention to detail, and it's SAP, so it's unforgiving. It assumes you know what you're doing. So the person who would be using one of these transactions is probably using that transaction nonstop all day long. They definitely know what they're doing. SAP is not going to walk them through it. There's not a lot of feedback. And if you do it wrong, it's going to assume you meant to do it wrong and it'll move on. So, again, slow down. There's nothing extraneous within the labs. There are some other SAP labs out there in the University Alliance that have a lot of extra information in them. The fluff is removed from these labs. So it may, if you know SAP well, it may be telling you a bit more about how to navigate than you need, but the text surrounding the screenshots, nothing extraneous. Read it all. There are procedures that are discussed within the text. There's answers there. If you're assuming you know what you're doing and all you have to do is look at the screenshot, you're potentially going to have errors. If you rush through the lab, you're potentially going to have errors as well. Within Labs 1 and 2, you were instructed various times to record information on the relevant information form in the last page of the textbook. Lab 3 refers to those amounts. So all of the information, some of the information, the euro amounts from Labs 1 and 2 show up in Lab 3. If you don't have the numbers, you can't do Lab 3. On the relevant information form, at the very bottom, there's a little paragraph that kind of says, if you're looking for this, go here. If you're looking for this, go here. There are not detailed instructions on how to find that data. You're kind of figuring it out as you go along. You can look online if you know you need certain information. I have the transaction listed in the paragraph. You'll need to go online if you can't figure it out on your own. In addition, watch your decimal points. I've seen this happen before. You add an extra digit before the decimal, and it throws things off. So make sure that you are transcribing and copying the exact number you should be copying. Some notes, again, this happens a couple of times within the labs. If you see the warning about tomorrow's date, you're working on this after 5 p.m. Central Time, you may have to use tomorrow's date instead of today's date. There's limited feedback in transactions, so do realize the person who's zipping around doing this all day long is not really interested in getting a big text box popping up saying, this is what's going on. So sometimes if you're trying to move too quickly, you may miss the feedback. It's in the bottom left corner of the screen where it'll say, this just happened. And if you start clicking somewhere else, it's gone. So slow down, make sure you're watching for the feedback. In addition, Lab 3 will not work if Labs 1 and 2 were not completed accurately. So if you went through the steps and you think you did it, but you actually didn't do them according to the instructions, Lab 3 is not going to work. So make sure that you have completed Labs 1 and 2 accurately. If for some reason you've gone back and completed Labs 1 and 2 a second time before doing Lab 3, that's fine. Just realize that you'll need to pick the documents that go along with one set of processes and transactions. So keep track of all of that information as you go through. If you have open purchase orders or sales orders, don't worry about it. The accounting people are not going to come after you and yell at you for open documents. Just complete whichever documents are relevant as you've completed 1 and 2 accurately. If you have any questions, slow down, read the text. A lot of the information, a lot of the answers that you might, for questions you might have, are within the text themselves. If you're working within a group, make sure you work with your group. This is not the kind of thing that you'll want to work individually. Again, when you go into certain transactions, you'll see everyone's data. If you're working by yourself, you may throw off other people's data. And once you've exhausted all other aspects, then ask your instructor for help, especially if you're in a big class. So 40, 50 students is very difficult if everyone's asking questions. So work within your group, try to figure it out within the text, and then you ask your instructor. And again, slow down. This isn't a race.